Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I would correct you. The first book I wrote was Dancing at the Dead Sea. The second book I wrote, which my husband laughingly refers to as Dancing at the Bottom of the Dead Sea, is actually called Seasick, and it's the one that's just come out in the last year in Canada and just very recently in paperback in Canada, and has, might I add, become an international bestseller, which is extremely rare for Canadian nonfiction. It's pretty thrilling. I want to say how glad I am to be back in Calgary. I lived here for 6 years as a reporter for the Globe and Mail and left in about 2000. Went back to Toronto with the Globe and really started my reporting about science here in this province because of all of the things that were happening here that are so fascinating with the environment, mainly with habitat destruction and some of the great innovations that Albertans are making in terms of the environment. But for me, it was always about the land. I mean, I grew up in Saskatchewan, and I didn't realize, I really never looked down. I only ever looked up and across. And I was right at the very end of writing my first book, and I was on the ocean at the time. I was in the Galapagos with one of the great marine biologists of all time, whose name is Sylvia Earle, and I was bunking with her, and we were doing a little survey of what was going on with some of the marine life in the Galapagos. And I was very impatient because my first book was about things that were happening on land in the climate, in the atmosphere, and in the Arctic. And here I was in the Galapagos, and there was this nice little Darwin theme through the first book, but I didn't see how it related to the ocean. And I just wanted to be on those volcanic islands that Darwin had looked at, and look at all the creatures that he had looked at, the iguanas and all this kind of stuff. And I was impatient with all of the people I was on the boat with, including Sylvia Earle, who was my bunkmate. Sylvia Earle, anybody, I don't know, do you know her? She's this tall. She's 95 pounds, soaking wet. She's a dynamo. This woman has spent more time at the bottom of the ocean than anybody else in the world, to the point that she's actually known as her deepness. Which I love, and she's absolutely formidable. I was terrified of her, right? And we were staying in this little bunk on this research ship, and every single electric outlet was plugged in with some sort of, instrument that she was using to test water and red tide stuff, and there was all this stuff going on. And one of them was, finally I tiptoed over to one of them and lifted the lid up, and I had never really spoken to her. I lifted it up, lid up like this, and realized that it was her hair curler plugged in there. And I thought to myself, this is a woman I can talk to. So I said to her, Sylvia, why are you looking at the ocean? Why aren't you, a biologist of the things on land and in air? And she said, well, my dear, because the ocean is where the life is. And for me, the penny dropped, and I realized that even though I had been writing about what I thought was the global environment and global issues to do with life support systems, I really had no understanding of what was happening in the ocean. And it launched me on this quest. And the quest was to figure out how the ocean works biologically. And by the way, there's only one ocean. We think of it as the 7 seas and all that kind of stuff, but it's one interconnected system. Scientists will tell you with little regions of specified species and things like that. It's all one system that works together. And so I thought to myself, and I looked for research on this, and really it's very hard to find research that describes the health of the system as a whole and the future of the system as a whole. What I discovered was that there were little bits and pieces of information all over the world that scientists were just coming to some conclusions about what was happening with the global ocean. And they were individual, they were like in silos. They didn't actually talk to each other very much about what was going on. So when I decided to write this book, I decided that I would treat it as if it were a body, because for me it's easier to understand the human body than it is to understand this incredibly complex global ecosystem called the ocean, the global ocean. So I started to think about, well, if I were to send the ocean to the doctor, there would be a list of symptoms and signs and trends that the doctor would be able to discuss about the health of this system.